Hello, hello, hello. Today we're going to be taking a look at NCSoft's and Throne of Liberty's weird investor situation. I've been monitoring the situation closely and it's been strange. It's been very strange. I don't really know how to feel about this because it felt like it kind of came out of nowhere, like literally nowhere. One moment everyone's going crazy over the game, and then just next moment it's like, yo, this company's going bankrupt. It's the investors are going crazy and they're talking crazy. I don't even know how to go about it, but I thought it would be an interesting video to share my findings and my interesting exploration into this subject. But yeah, with that being said, let's go ahead and just check this out. For those of you that are unfamiliar or the uninitiated, Throne of Liberty was a game that had a lot of hype, and it was essentially diving into a space that had a lot of barren game ideas and game concepts, and just overall not a whole lot going on, especially for console specifically, because console doesn't have a lot of staple MMOs. We have Final Fantasy, and then we also have ESO, and then Black Desert Online. That's kind of what we're working with, and two of those games are relatively okay. Like ESO is pretty good, and then Final Fantasy is kind of new, so it's getting its footing, but it's also very good. And then Black Desert had a dedicated kind of cult following, and it was really good for the combat side of things, but it lacked in a myriad of other areas, and it's also been on a serious decline, and the player base has sort of jumped ship for the most part. And then not to mention, NCSoft acquired the North American CEO, Jiang Jae Jin, and she pretty much hopped over to NCSoft. So if I had to guess, there was probably, a little bit of information being tossed around. This is speculation, I have to say that, but I would assume that they knew that one of the games on console specifically was on a decline and players were looking for any reason to hop on something else. And I think that information really propelled NCSoft forward from a console standpoint. And then just from a PC standpoint too, I think that it's interesting that there wasn't a whole lot going on PC either. So this release in just all aspects feels like an absolute resounding success, but I think the issue lies in, as people played the game, they sort of started to realize that this is just kind of a not necessarily mediocre per se title, but I will say it's okay. It's just okay. Like, it's got fun aspects, but like a lot of it's time locked and it's time gated and all sorts of other stuff, and it's just not really there. Not to mention, I've leveled up a second character now, and going through that entire storyline again, you know that situation where you watch a movie a couple times and then you start to notice things wrong with it? That was kind of the situation with me, right? I was playing through it again and I started to notice, man, this questing is a slog. This is not fun, and it's just unrealistic to try and level up an alt because it doesn't feel good to do so. So I was just kind of realizing, as I kept playing through the game and playing new aspects and playing new parts of it and just messing around with things, I started to realize that this is not as good as I thought it was. And it's okay, right? There's aspects of it that I think are great, like the dungeons, for example. I think they did an outstanding job with the dungeon mechanics, but they time gated it. So it's like a double-edged sword kind of thing. Like, great mechanics, but you can only do it for so many, times out of the week, right? Because it's time gated. So you only get some of the currency. So it's just like, the Lord taketh, the Lord giveth, you know what I mean? But overall, I just think that the game had a really good launch and a lot of hype around it, with a ton of content created from all different spaces, jumping ship like Shroud, Blue Squadron, Beguni, and so on. There was a ton of players that were really, really household names in the console and PC community that were all jumping on there and playing the game and raising awareness and hype around it. And then as time went on, I think that it got a little lukewarm, you know what I mean? But that's just speculation, so take that as you will. One thing I do want to mention is the development cycle and the process of the unrealistic expectations that happened with this game. Originally, I believe Throne of Liberty was supposed to be a sequel to Lineage, and it was just sort of what the hell? I don't know who exactly was asking for that, but essentially that got changed around, and which was the reason that I think it got delayed a few times, or it just got delayed in general. And overall, it was cool. And on paper, it was okay, but I don't think that anybody was necessarily looking for a Lineage sequel, especially on console. But I think that this delay in development costed probably a lot more than they expected, and investors weren't necessarily happy about it, and it probably resulted in some more of a engaging conversations. It resulted in probably more negative outcomes than anything else. In general, though, despite the hype, the delay seemed to take a toll, and expectations of a higher quality graphics and engaging mechanics fell apart. And I wouldn't say fell apart, but they fell short. And fans kind of were sort of like, what the fuck is going on here? How is this a AAA game? At least that's how I felt, because I was like, this is going to be a AAA MMO release. And yeah, I don't think it was AAA at all. I think it was good, but it's not a AAA release for sure. Moving past that, let's talk about player reactions. I want to highlight a couple things here. I think when the game initially came out, a lot of people really critiqued the clunky mechanics of the game with the targeting and the weird kind of firing off mechanics, or not mechanics, but just like the firing off an ability where you have to lock onto a target in order to use certain abilities, which is a little strange. Makes it feel clunky when you're trying to, you have weird targeting, then you have weird abilities that only fire off when you have a target. So it's clunky because if you're not, if one part of that fails, the other part fails too, and it's just kind of a domino of effect of really clunky combat, and that still has yet to be fixed. I'm still experiencing that to this day, so it still needs a lot of refining for the most part, and to figure out especially how to make it work on console, because I think console suffers the most from this issue. But I think that also led to a bit of a turnoff for certain players. Another issue that I saw was a lot of people were sort of feeling like there was an overemphasis on monetization, and that's kind of crazy, because I feel like the monetization is not as egregious as some other games. Like, yeah, you can pay to win like a whale in this game, and you can do that if you really want to, but I never felt like it was necessary, right? Like, it's just a minor edge to me, like, because I haven't bought anything in the game yet except the leveling pass. That's the only thing I got for my main character, and I felt like that was worth it. It was like $5. Like, it literally costed me $5, and I got a lot of value out of that. But the other, like, people saying overemphasis on monetization, like, I get it. It's not pretty when you look in the shop and you can see people buying hundreds of dollars worth of Lucent in order to buy gear. That never feels great, but I don't necessarily think that that's the reason the game sucks or that the game is failing. I don't see that, but that is some speculation and critique that I've seen floating around. What I think it is for the most part, the West is very, very sensitive to hyper monetization, or just monetization in general. So whenever people in the States, or just, you know, the West side of things, see that there's monetization everywhere, or that they just see a decent amount of it to where it affects gameplay to a certain degree or affects progression, we tend to be a bit more volatile and explosive when it comes to critiquing this sort of genre of game. Korean MMOs that's free to play, you're going to see a lot of hyper monetization for the most part, but I would say that there's way more egregious systems than what Throne of Liberty has. But clearly this didn't sit well with players, so it was already skeptical from the jump, but I think now it's just gotten a little bit worse. And I think that there was something to be said about monetization while we're on the topic, that apparently the old CEO of the Western office for NCSoft was pretty much canned for not wanting to monetize their game in an aggressive way. And investors are really pressuring NCSoft to do hyper monetization worse than what it is now currently. So that's just something that I think should be brought up very immediately, because that is whoa, I don't know about that. That's listen, Jung Jae-jin, I said a lot of nice things about her because I met her at an event, and she was really cool. She seemed very interactive and that she cared about players. But supposedly I had heard that somebody sent me a comment right from Blue Squadron's video and then said I should look into this, and I did, and I checked it out. And as it turns out that, as I say this as it turns out, but essentially the old CEO was fired for not wanting to do hyper monetization, and then Jung Jae-jin, the new CEO currently, decided to take up the role to enforce hyper monetization. This is again speculation and what I'm looking at. I'm still researching this as we speak. There's just not a whole lot of information quite yet on it, but I just want to bring that up, that if that's the case, I got the character pegged wrong immensely if that's the case. That feels bad. I don't know if that's true or not, but if it is, that really sucks. I just want to add some clarification on the statement that I made here. So the reason I had mentioned that, like, she's there to enforce monetization rules, the idea here and the concept and the speculation on my end is because the old CEO wasn't really doing hyper monetization strategies that were going to make the investors happy, right? But then JJ comes around and she's like, hey, I'll take the job, which kind of gives off the impression that she might be willing to enforce those hyper monetization rules, or not necessarily rules, but the incentive for that type of stuff. Because why would they hire a person with the same issues? You know what I mean? Because the investors were throwing a fit of the old CEO not necessarily enforcing monetization properly, and then for them to hire another CEO that is going to follow down the same path, it would just piss off the investors again. So that's kind of my thought process behind this. But again, this is just hard speculation and I don't want to like say anything like that, but I just wanted to clarify. But back to the video. But just hearing about the old NCSoft CEO getting canned because of lack of hyper monetization efforts, that seems really like that makes me not want to support the game even less. So kind of feels bad, you know. With that being said, let's talk about what NCSoft's next moves are and the change of focus that they're kind of doing with their company. So essentially, the company seems to be looking for a fresh direction. Some reports suggest they're doubling down on mobile gaming, which is, I'm not surprised at that. Some people are going to be pissed because people in the West generally hate mobile gaming because they find it boring or predatory or hyper monetized. So we've seen some interesting concepts for this, and it makes sense because I think that there's a cultural difference when it comes to mobile gaming in the West and in places like Korea, Japan, China, etc. I was doing a little bit of research into sort of the work culture and the education culture over there in just the East side of things, right? And the thing that I found the most interesting is that the work culture and the educational and extracurricular demands in general are far more demanding. It's actually kind of crazy over there. And for us in the States, right, I feel like a 9-to-5 job is far more flexible. Just based off of what I've read, it seems like mobile gaming is super popular over there because it's just much easier to pull out your phone and start gaming, especially when you're studying and you're on a break at work or something like that. It makes sense where you're maybe at a library or you're at home and you just don't want to boot up a console, play a game or whatever, your PC. I don't know. It just feels like people are more inclined to pull out their phones and do some gaming on there versus trying to find any kind of console to play and find time to do that, which I feel ties into NCSoft's decision to sort of focus more on mobile gaming, where they've just seen some more consistent success because of the way that things are. I don't think that's going to be very successful in the West if they try and do that, but definitely in the East, I could see them being very, very successful with mobile titles and mobile focuses. Not to mention, they're just less risky to develop and they're also quicker to develop. So it just makes sense that they're going to bring in more revenue faster than larger scale MMORPGs, which are very expensive and time consuming. So just take that with, a grain of salt. Overall, this pivot to mobile isn't exactly what diehard fans are looking for from NCSoft, that's for sure, but that's what we're probably going to get. If nothing else, some devil's advocate here, maybe them getting some serious revenue from mobile gaming will help stabilize the company in order to provide some sort of development cost to produce more content for TNL and more of a expansive future for hopefully more success in the title. So we'll see where that goes, but I just thought that was interesting. Now, another thing that I kind of want to bring to the sort of the bigger picture, so to speak here, all of this raises kind of a question about the state of MMORPGs, right? And Throne of Liberty isn't the only MMO to see some struggle with rising development costs and shifting player interest. So companies, I think, are going to start looking for different alternatives to these bigger, risky titles that are not necessarily doing extremely well. And this is where I sort of was like, I don't think companies need to shift their entire direction. I just think they need to produce an actually good game, because right now we've been shoveled crap for a few years now, and I think the players are getting tired of it. And now companies, instead of trying to produce something good, they're trying to figure out how to produce something quickly that comes off as good, that generates revenue. And that's the issue, in my personal opinion. I mean, we've seen things like New World, Lost Ark. Those games struggled immensely. I mean, New World essentially had to re-release their whole damn game just to try and do a whole factory reset type situation. And Lost Ark, I think, lost its allure whenever the game slowly kind of came out, and then people were playing it and they were feeling it. And it kind of had something similar to Throne of Liberty as well, where they played it heavily and then they realized this is I'm never going to be able to get to a place in this game where I'm going to be happy. And people sort of jump ship off of it. And then as company costs and just maintenance costs rises, and then the player base dwindles, the money stops coming in. And then they're like, well, how do we keep managing this giant game that costs $1 million some odd just to produce? And it's probably more than that, but you get the point. It just kind of feels like the golden age of MMORPGs has sort of passed, and that's how it's feeling. But maybe, you know, we'll come back to full circle at some point. The next thing that I sort of want to mention is the company restructuring and investor conversations that I've heard. So basically, to start with the restructuring part, they're essentially coming out with like Studio X, Studio Y, and so on. And they're pretty much restructuring the company so that way certain sectors of the company are going to be working on the other games. Like they have this looter shooter that's supposed to be coming out. And I gotta be honest, just as a quick segment here, I don't think that this game is going to do very well. I just watched the gameplay for it, and it just looks painfully mediocre. It just feels like a dude shooting behind a barrier, and there's like hardly any mechanical feedback. It doesn't really sound that great. The enemies feel generic. The character looks generic. Granted, this is still development, so just keep that in mind. But like just looking at this does not look impressive, and this does not look like it'll grab attention either. Not only that, but since they're having monetization issues and revenue generation issues, I feel like they're going to try and find a way to hyper monetize this game to recoup losses in other areas of the company. So on top of this game looking painfully mediocre, I feel like they're going to try and monetize this game all the fuck, and it's just going to make the game even worse. So them diverting resources to restructure the company to work on something like this feels like such a horrible idea. Like this generally feels like a really bad idea to do that. So I don't know about that one, but that's something I found. Now, in terms of investor conversations, I've heard a few things. One, layoffs are happening. They pretty much were asking why or how they're gonna move forward to cut company costs in order to recoup some of their loss in revenue, right? So layoffs were pretty much happening, and refocusing of other projects were happening, and investors expecting a major return with Throne of Liberty, and then they didn't get it, which that just feels bad that people are losing the job, that they're gonna lose their job over this type of stuff. And then on top of that too, I had heard that they're gonna be using AI specifically to try and cut company costs as well, and have that, you know, impact their development cycles. When I listened to an investor call for Black Desert Online and Pearl Abyss's investor call, this conversation also happened in that investor call where one of the investors had mentioned or had asked, what are you guys doing to, alleviate company costs or whatever? It was basically just, big wig speech for what are you guys doing to save money? And then Pearl Abyss's response was they're using AI to alleviate company resources and just sort of, cut back on spending so much, which I think is just company jargon for we're making an effort, because I'm not exactly sure what AI is doing for them, but I assume it's a lot. So just take that with a grain of salt. But I did think that was interesting that I found two companies that are both in the Korean MMO space that are utilizing AI to alleviate company cost. The robot takeover is here, boys. It's crazy. So closing thoughts, that's kind of really all I have to say for right now. That's just sort of just my ending statement here. I think the restructuring of the company is interesting. I don't know how that's going to work or how it's going to go. The mobile gaming idea, I get it, but I feel like it's just going to suck and it's not going to be very good. That is just a conversation that is happening. I don't know that that's anytime soon, but that is just something that I mentioned or that I wanted to mention as I was researching into this video. But yeah. That's pretty much it for today's video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Let me know what you guys think about all this. But yeah, bye-bye.